Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku took the role of Robin and turned against Batman. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world dissolved into a scream of shattered physics. One moment, Izuku Midoriya was a maelstrom of green lightning and righteous fury, the very air crackling with the inherited power of generations. He was Deku, the successor to All Might, using Black Whip to sling a family's car away from a collapsing overpass while simultaneously preparing a 30% Detroit smash for the villain responsible. The villain called himself Distortion, a man whose quirk was a terrifying affront to Euclidean geometry. The space around him warped and buckled like heat haze on asphalt. Streets bent into impossible parabolas, buildings twisted into taffy-like spirals, and the sound of sirens stretched into low, mournful groans. Fighting him was like trying to punch a nightmare. "You heroes are all the same!" Distortion shrieked, his own form wavering, his limbs elongating and contracting with every pulse of his power. "You impose order on a world that craves chaos. Let me show you what true reality looks like." Danger sense screamed a razor-sharp alarm in Izuku's skull, not a focused point of threat, but an all-encompassing, deafening klaxon. Distortion wasn't aiming at him. He was aiming at everything. The villain clapped his hands together, and the air in the center of the intersection imploded. It didn't explode. It collapsed inward, creating a vortex of shimmering, non-Euclidean space that began to suck in debris, light, and sound. A singularity of pure chaos. Izuku's focus narrowed. A little girl, no older than Eri, had been knocked down near the edge of the vortex's pull. Her mother was frantically trying to reach her, but the unnatural gravity was too strong. Izuku didn't hesitate. He never did. He pushed one for all to 45%, the power of familiar, comforting inferno under his skin. With a flick of his fingers, he launched an Air Force round to shove the mother back towards safety. He then used float to launch himself towards the girl, his movements a desperate, high-speed ballet. He wrapped Black Whip tendrils around a miraculously stable lamppost, anchoring himself as he reached for the child. He got his hand around her small arm just as the vortex surged. The pull was immense, a physical manifestation of oblivion. The vestiges in his mind were screaming, a chorus of warning and raw power. "Kid, it's unstable! Get out of there!" The gruff voice of the second user was a ghost in his mind. "Focus, Ninth! You can do this!" All Might's voice, a beacon of hope even in memory. Izuku gritted his teeth, muscles screaming in protest. He swung the little girl in a wide, powerful arc, launching her back towards the arms of her waiting mother and a nearby Uravity, who expertly nullified her gravity for a safe landing. The relief that flooded him was a fatal distraction. With his anchor point now the only thing holding him, and his focus broken for a split second, the vortex found its purchase. The Black Whip tendrils snapped like cheap twine. Distortion cackled, a sound that broke into a dozen discordant echoes. "A true hero," the villain mocked. "Always willing to trade yourself for another. Let's see where this trade takes you." The world wasn't just pulled, it was unwritten. Izuku felt a sensation like being flayed, not just his skin, but his very existence. Colors he had no name for bled into his vision. The comforting sun of one for all within him flickered, sputtered, and was violently snuffed out, like a candle in a hurricane. It wasn't gone, he could feel the faintest, most distant ember, but the connection was severed. The voices of the vestiges vanished, replaced by a roaring, cosmic silence. Then came the impact. It wasn't a sudden stop, but a grinding, brutal arrival. Hard, wet stones slammed against his back, knocking the air from his lungs in a ragged gasp. The sensory assault that followed was immediate and overwhelming. The smell first. Rotting garbage, stagnant water, and the acrid tang of exhaust fumes. It was thick, cloying, a stark contrast to the clean air of Mizutsu, even in the middle of a battle. Then the sound. The relentless, drumming patter of rain against metal and concrete. The distant, lonely wail of a different kind of siren. The muffled thumping of a bass line from some unseen, grimy establishment. He forced his eyes open. Above him was not a sky warped by a villain's quirk, but a sliver of bruised, purple-black sky, choked by the towering, lightless walls of brick buildings. Fire escapes zigzagged up their sides like rusted iron ribs. Rain fell in a steady, miserable drizzle, plastering his tattered costume to his skin and turning the grime on the ground into a slick slurry. This was an alley. A filthy, forgotten corner of some city he didn't recognize. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of his concussion. Okay, Midoriya, analyze, he muttered, his voice a raw croak. He tried to push himself up, and a searing pain shot through his left arm. A quick glance revealed a deep, jagged gash, likely from whatever he'd landed on. His costume, the advanced gamma suit that Mei Hatsum had poured her genius into, was shredded in places. He reached inward, searching for the familiar warmth of One for All. He found nothing. Only a hollow, terrifying void where a star used to be. The connection was gone. He was, for the first time since that day on the beach with All Might, quirkless. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, stealing what little breath he had left. The world tilted, the oppressive walls of the alley seeming to close in on him. This was worse than before. Before, he had only ever known powerlessness. Now, he knew what he had lost. It was like going blind after a lifetime of sight. He stumbled to his feet, leaning heavily against the cold, damp brick. He had to get his bearings. Find a pro-hero, contact UA, anything. He limped out of the alley's mouth, hissing as his battered ribs protested. The street was a canyon of crumbling Gothic architecture and flickering neon signs that bled lurid colors onto the wet asphalt. The cars were different, larger, older models that rumbled past with a guttural inefficiency. The people huddled under umbrellas, their faces grim and shadowed, their gazes fixed firmly on the pavement in front of them. There were no bright costumes, no cheerful heroes waving to the public. There was just grayness. A pervasive, soul-deep gloom that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the city. He saw a newsstand, its papers protected from the rain by a yellowed plastic sheet. He squinted, trying to read the headlines. The language was English, a subject he'd been decent at, but the script and slang were unfamiliar. One name, however, stood out in a bold, blocky font on the front page of the Gotham Gazette. Wayne. Another article spoke of a recent breakout from some place called Arkham Asylum, Gotham. He'd never heard of a city in Japan called Gotham. His heart began to beat a frantic, desperate rhythm against his broken ribs. This wasn't just a different city. This was somewhere else entirely. The thought was so preposterous, so utterly insane, that he almost dismissed it. But the evidence was all around him, the architecture, the language, the oppressive atmosphere, the chilling absence of anything related to quirks or heroes. His dream hadn't just been shattered. It had been erased from reality. He was alone. Powerless. A lost ghost in a world that didn't know he existed. The weight of it all was too much. His legs gave out, and he slid down the grimy wall of a building, the rain doing little to wash away the blood and filth that clung to him. He was just a boy in a torn costume, bleeding in a forgotten corner of an alien world. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was a shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows of a rooftop across the street, a silhouette of impossible size and menace, descending on silent wings. A shadow fell over him, a patch of deeper darkness in the already dim alley. Izuku's eyes fluttered open, his consciousness a flickering candle flame. A figure loomed over him, immense and terrifying. It was shaped like a man, but it was too large, too broad, its form broken by sharp, demonic ears and a cape that seemed to drink the very light from the air. It was a pro-hero. It had to be. But it was unlike any hero he had ever seen. There was no color, no friendly smile, no reassuring logo. There was only the black of the abyss and a stark, bat-like symbol emblazoned on a chest of gray armor plating. The figure knelt, its movements silent and precise, radiating an aura of contained violence that made the hair on Izuku's neck stand up. "Who are you?" The voice was a low, gravelly growl, processed through some kind of modulator. It was the sound of gravestones grinding together. Izuku tried to answer, but only a weak cough escaped him. His mind, still stubbornly analytical even in its panic state, was racing. No visible support gear for flight, but descended silently. Stealth suit? The material of the cape is non-reflective, likely a fire-retardant polymer blend. Utility belt, at least a dozen compartments. High-tech, custom-made. Symbol is meant to inspire fear. A nocturnal hero? The dark figure's glowing white lenses narrowed. He reached out a gloved hand, not to attack, but to check the pulse at Izuku's neck. The touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to his terrifying appearance. The costume, it's made of a fiber I don't recognize. The voice rumbled, more to himself than to Izuku. Multiple old injuries. Healed fractures. Scar tissue consistent with repeated, high-impact trauma. You're a soldier boy. What war are you from? Izuku's world was spinning. He tried to focus on the bat symbol, to make sense of it. He had studied heroes his entire life, both Japanese and international. He had never seen this emblem. All Might. He managed to rasp, the name a prayer on his lips. The figure paused. The name clearly meant nothing to him. He ran a scanner from his gauntlet over Izuku's body. It beeped softly. Faint, exotic energy readings. But they're fading. Whatever you are, you're hurt and alone. The figure scooped him up with an ease that bespoke incredible strength. Izuku was too weak to resist, his head lolling against the hard plate of the man's chest. He felt a strange sense of surrender. For the first time in a long time, someone else was taking charge. Don't worry, the gravelly voice said, the sound vibrating through Izuku's bones. You're safe for now. As he was carried through the rain-slicked darkness, Izuku's consciousness finally gave out, his last coherent thought a question that echoed in the terrifying emptiness where One for All used to be. What kind of hero saves people by scaring them? He awoke to the scent of antiseptic and Earl Grey tea. The ceiling above him was an expanse of ornate plasterwork, depicting cherubs and clouds in muted tones. He was lying in a bed so vast and comfortable it felt like being cradled in a cloud. His body was clean, his wounds expertly dressed and bandaged. The tattered remains of his gamma suit were gone, replaced by a pair of soft, silk pajamas. He sat up slowly, his ribs aching a dull, manageable protest. The room was a study in old-world luxury. A grand mahogany wardrobe stood against one wall, a fireplace with a marble mantelpiece against another. Through a towering, mullioned window, he could see a manicured lawn, impossibly green, stretching out towards a line of distant trees under a perpetually overcast sky. The door opened with a soft click. An elderly man with a neatly trimmed white mustache and a perfectly pressed black suit entered, carrying a silver tray. He was thin but carried himself with an air of quiet dignity and unshakable competence. Ah, you are awake! Excellent, the man said, his English crisp and impeccably accented. He placed the tray on a bedside table. It held a porcelain teapot, a cup and saucer, and a plate of small, meticulously cut sandwiches. I am Alfred Pennyworth. You are at Wayne Manor. Do you feel up to eating something? Izuku stared, overwhelmed. Wayne Manor? He repeated, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. He remembered the name from the newspaper. Indeed, sir, Alfred replied, pouring a cup of tea. Master Bruce brought you here last night. You were in quite a state. A dislocated shoulder, 3 fractured ribs, a significant laceration on your forearm, and a moderate concussion. You are, if you'll forgive my saying so, remarkably durable. Izuku took the offered cup, his hands trembling slightly. Master Bruce, the man who found you, Alfred said simply, his expression unreadable. He has been called away on business this morning. He asked me to ensure your comfort. The kindness was disorienting. He was a stranger, found bleeding in an alley, yet he was being treated like an honored guest. He took a tentative bite of a sandwich. Cucumber. It tasted clean, real. Thank you, Mr. Pennyworth, Izuku said, his voice still hoarse. But I don't understand. Where am I? What is this place? Alfred's gaze softened with a hint of pity. You are in Gotham City, young man. As for where that is in relation to your home, that seems to be the more complicated question. Over the next hour, Alfred gently, patiently, dismantled Izuku's world. Izuku asked about Japan, about Muzutafu. Alfred, using a tablet to access maps, showed him that while Japan existed, Muzutafu did not. Izuku asked about pro-heroes, about the hero ranking system, about the pillars of his society. Alfred explained that in this world, there were no government-sanctioned heroes. There were only police officers, soldiers, and vigilantes. The final, desperate question came, the one Izuku was most terrified to ask. Quirks? He whispered, his eyes pleading. Superpowers? Meta-abilities? Alfred shook his head slowly. Fascinating concepts, my boy. The stuff of comic books and fantasy novels. But I'm afraid they are not a reality of our world. We are all, for better or worse, merely human. The teacup slipped from Izuku's fingers, shattering on the polished hardwood floor. He didn't even notice. The last, desperate ember of hope inside him died, leaving behind a cold, gray ash. It was true, he was in another world. A world without quirks. A world without heroes. A world without all might. He was alone. Utterly and completely alone. The tears he had been holding back finally came, silent at first, then racking his body with deep, shuddering sobs. He curled into a ball on the bed, mourning not just his home, his friends, and his mentors, but the very essence of who he was. Deku, the hero, couldn't exist in a world like this. He was just Izuku Midoriya again, a quirkless, useless boy a universe away from home. Alfred didn't say a word. He simply placed a comforting hand on Izuku's shoulder, a silent, steady presence in the face of a collapsing universe. Days bled into a week. Izuku's physical wounds healed with a speed that surprised Alfred, a lingering gift from the ghost of One for All. His spirit, however, remained shattered. He spent most of his time in the vast, cathedral-like library of Wayne Manor, sitting by the window and staring out at the rain, a silent, withdrawn figure lost in his own grief. He felt like a fraud. He was being cared for by this kind old man and an enigmatic, unseen billionaire, all because they thought he was some kind of child soldier. They didn't know the truth, that he was nobody, a fluke who had been given a power he no longer possessed. But the hero's mind, the one forged in countless battles and endless nights of study, could not stay dormant forever. The habits were too deeply ingrained. He started watching the news on the large television in the library. The news in Gotham was a relentless tide of misery, organized crime, political corruption, senseless violence, and woven through it all were whispers and grainy security footage of the Batman, the same dark, terrifying figure who had found him. At first, Izuku watched with a morbid curiosity. But then, the analyst in him began to stir. He found a blank notebook and a pen on one of the desks, and without thinking, he started to write. Reported incident. Falcone crime family warehouse raid near the Tricorner Yards. Batman neutralized 15 armed hostiles. Non-lethal methods confirmed. Police arrived to find them bound and waiting. Time of incident, 2:15 a.m. He paused, chewing on the end of his pen. A new entry. Reported incident. Attempted bombing of City Hall by a figure calling himself the Anarchist. Bomb disarmed. Attributed to Batman. Time, 3:47 a.m. His muttering started, a low, unconscious hum that slowly grew in volume. 2 major incidents on opposite sides of the city, less than 90 minutes apart. The travel time alone would be difficult, even with advanced transport. He must have a vehicle. Something fast. Ground-based or aerial? Ground is stealthier in an urban environment, but aerial allows for faster response times. Maybe both. He flipped the page, starting a map of the city based on news reports. The targets aren't random, he whispered to himself, his fingers tapping a frantic rhythm on the table. Falcone controls the docks. The Anarchist is a political terrorist. Batman is fighting a multi-front war against both organized crime and ideological extremism. His methods are fear-based. He appears and disappears like a phantom. Psychological warfare. He wants criminals to believe he's everywhere at once. But he's still just one man. He has to have a system. A network. He prioritizes. How does he choose his targets? Keystones. He isn't just mowing the lawn. He's pulling the roots. His notebook began to fill with diagrams, timelines, and speculative psychological profiles of villains he'd only ever heard mentioned in passing. Penguin, Riddler, Scarecrow. He analyzed Batman's fighting style from blurry videos, noting the efficiency, the brutal precision, the focus on joint manipulation and nerve strikes. It was designed to incapacitate as quickly and decisively as possible. He was so engrossed in his analysis that he didn't hear the footsteps approaching on the thick Persian rug. "You've been busy." Izuku jumped, spinning around so fast he nearly knocked over a stack of books. A man stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of effortless command. His dark hair was impeccably styled, and he wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than Izuku's family's apartment. But it was his eyes that captured Izuku's attention. They were a startlingly sharp blue, but they held a profound, ancient weariness, a deep-seated pain that he hid behind a mask of detached indifference. It was the face of a man who had seen too much. Izuku recognized him from the news. This was Bruce Wayne. Izuku frantically tried to hide his notebook, his face flushing with embarrassment. "I am sorry, Mr. Wayne. I didn't mean to." Bruce pushed off the doorframe and walked slowly into the room. He didn't look angry. He looked intrigued. His eyes flickered down to the open notebook on the desk. "Izuku hadn't been fast enough. Alfred tells me you're from a place with heroes," Bruce said, his voice a smooth, low baritone, a world away from the gravelly growl of the bat. "He tells me you were one of them." Izuku flinched, looking down at his hands. "I was. I'm not anymore. I don't have my quirk. I'm nothing." "Nothing?" Bruce was standing beside the desk now. He picked up the notebook, his expression unreadable as he scanned the pages filled with Izuku's frantic scrawls and detailed analysis. He stopped on a page dedicated to Batman's methodology. "You've accurately deduced my patrol patterns, my probable vehicle specifications, and the core tenets of my operational strategy. You theorize that fear is not the goal, but a tool used to create a momentary tactical advantage and a long-term psychological deterrent." Izuku's blood ran cold. "My patrol patterns." The words hit him like a physical blow. He stared at Bruce Wayne, truly seeing him for the first time, the powerful build under the suit, the faint scar on his chin, the intensity in his eyes. He superimposed the memory of the dark creature from the alley over the man in front of him. The cowl. The growl. The symbol. It was him. You're... Izuku stammered, his mind reeling. "You wrote here," Bruce continued, his voice calm, cutting through Izuku's shock, "that Batman's greatest weakness is that he is a symbol of fear in a city that desperately needs a symbol of hope. You wrote that a shadow, no matter how powerful, cannot drive out the darkness. It only deepens it." "Explain." Izuku's mouth was dry. He was standing in front of the very enigma he had spent days obsessing over. His fear was quickly being replaced by the frantic energy of a theorist presented with the subject of his thesis. He took a deep breath, his muttering habit taking over, but this time with a focused, passionate intensity. "Fear is a powerful motivator for criminals, but it's a negative reinforcement. It stops them from doing bad things, but it doesn't inspire anyone to do good things. It makes civilians afraid, too. They see you as another monster fighting the other monsters in the dark. A city can't heal that way. To truly save a city, you need someone who inspires hope, someone who makes people believe in a better tomorrow, someone who smiles in the face of danger and tells them, it's fine now." "Why?" "Because I am here," he trailed off, realizing he had just quoted All Might. The pain of his loss lanced through him, and his shoulders slumped. "A symbol of peace," he finished quietly. "That's what a true hero should be." Bruce Wayne looked at him, and for the first time, the mask of weary indifference cracked. He saw past the broken, grieving boy. He saw the brilliant mind, the unwavering moral compass, the unquenchable fire of a heroic spirit that refused to be extinguished, even when its world had been ripped away. He saw the same drive that had sent him on his own crusade, but untainted by the cynicism and darkness that had consumed him. He saw potential. He closed the notebook and placed it gently back on the desk. "You've lost your world, Izuku Midoriya," Bruce said, his voice low and serious. "You've lost your power. You believe your dream is dead." He met Izuku's wide, green eyes, and his gaze was like forged steel. "You're wrong. Your dream followed you here. Gotham is a city drowning in the dark. Maybe you're right. Maybe it needs more than just a shadow." He gestured for Izuku to follow him. "Come with me. I have something to show you. Bruce Wayne led the lost hero of another world towards a stately grandfather clock in the corner of the study, a gateway to a destiny Izuku could never have imagined, a path that would lead him not to the light, but into the very heart of the shadow he had so brilliantly analyzed. The world, as Izuku Midoriya had known it, had been dismantled piece by piece. His home, his friends, his power, all erased. And now, the man who had pulled him from the wreckage of his old life was leading him towards a grandfather clock that chimed with the hollow sound of finality. Bruce Wayne stopped before it, his hand resting on the polished wood. You spoke of symbols, Izuku. Of what a hero should be. He turned his head, his sharp blue eyes locking onto Izuku's. There was no trace of the vacant playboy billionaire in his gaze. This was the focused, unnerving intensity of the Batman. I want to show you mine. With a deliberate motion, he reached up and moved the hands of the clock to 10:47. A low groan of hidden machinery echoed from behind the wall, and the entire clock slid aside, revealing a dark, descending staircase carved into stone. A draft of cool, subterranean air, smelling of damp earth and ozone, washed over them. Izuku's breath hitched. His analytical mind, his one remaining superpower, kicked into overdrive, trying to process the sheer audacity of it. A hidden entrance in plain sight. Classic misdirection. The time. 10:47. Is it significant? A code? A date? The mechanism is nearly silent. High torque, low decibel servo motors. After you, Bruce said, his voice a low command. Izuku hesitated for only a second before descending into the darkness. The stone steps were worn smooth by the passage of countless years, slick with moisture. The staircase spiraled down, deeper and deeper, until the light from the library was a distant memory. The air grew colder, and a new sound joined the chorus of their footsteps, the rhythmic dripping of water and a low, powerful hum. The staircase opened into a cavern of breathtaking scale. It was a vast, natural grotto, its ceiling lost in a cathedral of shadow where thousands of bats roost, their soft chittering a constant, living static. But the floor of this cave was anything but natural. It was a sprawling complex of steel gantries, high-tech workstations, and gleaming, monstrous vehicles. In the center of it all was a massive computer, its bank of monitors casting an ethereal blue glow on the scene. To one side, a sleek, black car that looked more like an armored tank than a civilian vehicle sat in silent menace. On another platform rested a futuristic jet, its wings shaped like a bat's. Display cases lined one wall, holding a bizarre and terrifying collection of trophies, a giant penny, a robotic Tyrannosaurus Rex, a massive Joker playing card, and in the center of the main platform, encased in illuminated glass, was the suit. The black and gray armor, the scalloped cape, the demonic cowl of the Batman. Izuku stood frozen on the bottom step, his mind a roaring tempest of awe and terror. He had analyzed the Batman from grainy news clips and third-hand accounts. He had built a theoretical model of the man, but the reality, the sheer, overwhelming reality of this place, this armory, this Batcave, was beyond anything his notebook could contain. This, Bruce's voice echoed in the vast space, devoid of its public warmth, replaced by the gravelly texture of command. This is my war. And this is my armory. Izuku's muttering started, a quiet, frantic litany of observation. Karst cave system, geologically stable, direct access from the Manor Foundation, impossible to detect from the surface. The power consumption must be astronomical, independent generator, likely nuclear or a next-gen geothermal system. The computer, quantum processing? The sheer bandwidth, he's tapped into every network in the city, probably the world. The vehicles, custom-built, armored plating appears to be a titanium Kevlar composite. Weapon systems are primarily non-lethal, riot control tech adapted for surgical strikes. He trailed off as Bruce moved to stand beside him. The billionaire had shed his suit jacket, and the powerful physique of the Batman was evident in the taut lines of his dress shirt. You have a remarkable mind, Izuku, Bruce stated, not as a compliment, but as a fact. You see the world as a series of interconnected systems to be analyzed and understood. I do the same, but your analysis was incomplete. You said a shadow cannot drive out the darkness. You were right. He turned to face Izuku fully. For 8 years I have been a shadow. I have instilled fear. I have waged a one-man war, and for every victory, the city finds a new way to decay. I am a necessary evil, a boogeyman to frighten criminals back into the dark. But Gotham needs more than that. It needs what you spoke of. It needs a light. A symbol that proves that the darkness hasn't won, that there is still hope. Bruce's gaze was heavy, pinning Izuku in place. You lost your power, but you never lost your spirit. You still have the heart of a hero. The world you knew is gone, but the need for heroes is universal. I can give you a new purpose. I can give you the tools, the training. I can teach you how to fight in this world, how to be more than just a memory of what you were. He gestured to the vast cave around them. I am offering you a place in this war. Not as a shadow, but as a counterpoint. A way to be the hero you were always meant to be, right here, in a city that has forgotten the meaning of the word. Izuku stared at him, his heart hammering against his bruised ribs. The offer was insane. It was dangerous. It was everything he had ever wanted. The dream he thought had died in a vortex of shattered space was suddenly, impossibly, alive again. It was a different shape, a darker color, but it was there. The chance to save people, the chance to be a symbol. He looked from the terrifying Batman armor to the earnest, weary face of Bruce Wayne. He saw the pain there, the endless crusade born of a tragedy he couldn't yet comprehend. And in that pain, he saw a mission. He straightened his back, the slouched posture of his grief falling away. He met Bruce's gaze, and for the first time since he'd woken up in this world, his eyes burned with their old fire. What do we do first? The word training was an insult to the reality that followed. It was a crucible, a relentless, soul-grinding process designed to break him down to his component parts and rebuild him into something else, something harder. Something worthy of Gotham. His days became a blur of controlled violence and intellectual rigor. Mornings began before dawn on the sprawling grounds of Wayne Manor. Bruce, a silent, imposing figure in gray sweats, would push him through brutal conditioning exercises. Miles of running through the rain-soaked woods, carrying weighted packs. Hundreds of pull-ups from the thick branches of ancient oak trees. Agility drills that involved navigating the manor's ornate rooftops, every gargoyle and parapet a potential handhold or a fatal misstep. Izuku's body, honed by years of UA's punishing regimen and the strain of One for All, responded with astonishing speed. He was already strong, fast, and incredibly durable, but his style was all wrong for Gotham. Too wide. Bruce grunted, effortlessly parrying a high kick from Izuku during a sparring session on the gym mats. He swept Izuku's other leg, sending him crashing to the floor. Your movements are for a stage, for an audience. You telegraph every attack. Here, there is no audience. There is only the fight. Bruce's style was a brutal fusion of a dozen martial arts, honed to a single purpose, incapacitation. It was efficient, vicious, and devoid of wasted motion. A jab to the throat, a strike to the solar plexus, a precise, calculated blow to a nerve cluster or a joint. Izuku, a practitioner of shoot style, was all about speed, acrobatics, and overwhelming power focused through his legs. He was used to shattering concrete, not dislocating shoulders. Power is a crutch, Bruce admonished, standing over him. You relied on it. Now it's gone. You must learn to rely on this. He tapped his temple. And this. He tapped Izuku's chest. Technique and will. Get up. Izuku got up. Again and again. Each time, he was a little faster, his form a little tighter, his movements a little more economical. He learned to block, to parry, to use an opponent's momentum against them. He learned the cold, hard geometry of breaking a man's body without breaking his own code. Afternoons were spent in the cave, in the shadow of the back computer. This was where Izuku truly began to shine. Bruce would present him with cold cases, files digitized from the Gotham City Police Department's forgotten archives. Murders, kidnappings, elaborate heists. Izuku would lose himself for hours, his muttering a constant hum as he cross-referenced autopsy reports with witness statements, financial records with city blueprints. He found connections the original detectives had missed, patterns hidden in the static of old data. The calendar man killings, he mumbled, pacing in front of the giant screen. The police assumed the holiday theme was random, A psychopath's gimmick. But it's not. Look, each victim had a tangential connection to the old Falco-Moroni turf wars. The murder on St. Patrick's Day? The victim's grandfather was an Irish enforcer for Moroni. Valentine's Day? A distant relative of one of Falcone's lieutenants. He's not just killing on holidays. He's using the holidays as a code to settle old scores, a ghost cleaning house for a dead generation of mobsters. Bruce would watch from the shadows, a faint, almost imperceptible nod of approval his only praise. He was teaching Izuku to see Gotham not as a city, but as a wounded, living organism, its criminal underworld, the infection festering in its veins. It was during one of these sessions that the first real crack in their nascent partnership appeared. Bruce loaded up a complex simulation on the main screen, a hyper-realistic virtual reality scenario. A bank heist, Bruce explained, his voice the detached tone of a field commander. 3 armed men. 12 hostages. Standard procedure. The simulation began. Izuku, controlling an avatar, moved through the virtual bank with practiced stealth. He took down the first criminal silently, a perfect non-lethal takedown, but the other 2 were cornered in the main lobby, using hostages as shields. They're wired. Bruce's voice came through the comms. A dead man's switch. If you take one down, the other detonates the explosives. There are civilians on the street outside. The blast will breach the walls. Your choice. Izuku analyzed the scene, his mind racing. The placement of the bombs, the stress levels of the criminals, the panicked breathing of the hostages. He saw a solution. A narrow, high-risk window. I can create a diversion, Izuku said, his avatar creeping along a ventilation shaft. Use a smoke pellet to obscure their vision, then use a line launcher to pull the hostage on the right to safety. That creates a 1-second window where the second gunman is exposed. I can take him out before he can react. Risky. Bruce's voice was flat. The hostage could be shot in the chaos. The gunman could trigger the bomb out of panic. The optimal solution is a through-and-through shot on the primary gunman from your position. The bullet will pass through him and incapacitate the second. 1 hostile casualty, 0 civilian casualties. A clean win. Izuku froze. A shot? A lethal shot? It is a simulation, Izuku. Designed to teach you strategy. In this scenario, it is the only way to guarantee the safety of the hostages. Izuku's hands clenched. He felt a phantom ache in his bones, the ghost of one for all. No, he whispered. There's always another way. A hero's job is to find it. This isn't your old world. Bruce's voice was cold steel. There are no powers to level the playing field. Here, choices have consequences. Your hesitation just cost 2 hostages their lives. In the simulation, one of the gunmen grew impatient and shot a hostage. The scene dissolved into chaos. Simulation failed. Izuku ripped the VR headset off, his chest heaving. That's not fair. You designed it to be unwinnable without killing. I designed it to be real. Bruce countered, stepping out of the shadows. His face was a stone mask. Gotham will present you with choices where every option is a loss. Your job is not to find the perfect solution that doesn't exist. It's to choose the one that saves the most lives. It is a terrible calculus, but it is the one we are forced to make. I won't make it, Izuku said, his voice trembling with a defiant fury. I won't trade lives. I'll save everyone. That's what it means to be a hero, that idealism, Bruce said, his voice dangerously low. Will get you killed. And more importantly, it will get others killed. He turned and walked away, leaving Izuku standing alone in the cold blue light of the failed simulation. The seed of dissent had been planted. Izuku stared at his own hands, wondering if they could ever learn the brutal math that Bruce Wayne lived by. The strain of it all, the physical agony, the mental exhaustion, the moral weight, was taking its toll. One evening, during a particularly grueling sparring match, Bruce pushed him too far. Izuku was exhausted, his movements sloppy. Bruce exploited an opening, sweeping his legs and landing a hard, calculated punch to his solar plexus as he fell. The pain was a bright, blinding star. But behind it, something else flickered to life. A desperate, primal need to not fail. To get up. To be a hero. He pushed against the mat, a scream of exertion tearing from his throat, and for a split second, a tracery of emerald lightning, faint as a firefly's glow, danced across his arm. Crackle. The air smelled of ozone. Bruce froze, his fist raised for another blow. He stared at Izuku's arm, then at his wide, shocked eyes. Izuku looked down at his own hands. He felt it. A tiny, warm ember in the cold, cavernous void where One for All had been. It wasn't the roaring sun he was used to, but it was there. He reached for it, concentrating, and with a surge of effort, managed to make the green lightning flicker again, weakly. 5%. Maybe less. It was barely anything, but it was infinitely more than nothing. In the back of his mind, a chorus of whispers, faint and distant as a dream. Keep fighting, Ninth, a woman's voice, gentle and strong. That's the way, kid. All Might's familiar, comforting tone, a ghost of an echo. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes. He wasn't completely alone. They were still with him. Bruce lowered his hand, his expression unreadable. What was that? My quirk! Izuku gasped, a broken, hopeful laugh escaping him. It's not all gone. This changed the equation. The power was minimal, a small boost to his already impressive physical abilities, but it was a variable Bruce hadn't accounted for. It was a piece of Izuku's old world, a spark of the impossible in the grim reality of Gotham. It was hope, made manifest as green lightning. The final test came not in the cave or on the training grounds, but in the sterile, corporate halls of Wayne Enterprises. As part of Izuku's broader education, Bruce had him working as a low-level intern in the RD Security Division, analyzing data streams for anomalies. It was mind-numbingly dull work, but Izuku tackled it with his usual relentless enthusiasm. It was there, buried in terabytes of encrypted data logs, that he found it. A ghost signal. A tiny, repeating data packet being siphoned from the network every night at precisely 3:14 a.m. It was so small, so expertly hidden, that the company's automated security systems had missed it completely. He brought it to Bruce, who was, for once, impressed. They discovered the data was being routed to a shell corporation owned by Oswald Cobblepot, the Penguin. Someone was selling advanced biotech research from one of Wayne Enterprises' most secretive labs. Dr. Victor Fry's old cryogenics lab. Bruce identified, his fingers flying across the Batcomputer's keyboard. It was shut down after the accident with his wife. The research is highly classified, and dangerous. We need to find the source of the leak. That night, Bruce was called away as Batman, dealing with a riot at Blackgate Prison that had all the hallmarks of a Penguin-instigated diversion. Stay here, Izuku, he had commanded over the comms. Do not engage. Just keep monitoring the data. But as Izuku watched the network, he saw the ghost signal activate early. The thief was getting spooked. They were making a final, massive data dump right now. There was no time to wait for Batman. This was his choice. Obey or act. He thought of the failed simulation, of Bruce's cold calculus. He thought of what a hero would do. He made a decision. Donning a simple black thermal suit and a mask Bruce had provided for training, he used his knowledge of the Wayne Tower schematics to infiltrate the building. He moved through the darkened hallways like a phantom, all of Bruce's lessons on stealth coming to the forefront. He reached the cryogenics lab. Inside, a haggard-looking scientist, a man named Dr. Miles, was frantically downloading files onto a shielded hard drive. Izuku recognized him from the employee database. The man was drowning in medical debt for his sick son. It wasn't greed. It was desperation. Izuku didn't crash through the skylight. He didn't make a grand entrance. He simply stepped out of the shadows. Dr. Miles, he said, his voice steady. The scientist spun around, his face a mask of terror, brandishing a heavy wrench. Stay back. I have to do this. I know about your son, Izuku said softly, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. Cobblepot isn't going to help you. He'll take this research, and then he'll bury you. You know that. What other choice do I have? The man cried, tears streaming down his face. You have this one, Izuku said, taking a step forward. Let me help you. Mr. Wayne, he's a good man. He can help your son. There's a fund for employees in situations like this. You don't have to do this. The wrench wavered in Dr. Miles's grip. For a moment, it seemed Izuku's empathy had won. But then, the lab doors hissed open, and two of Penguin's thugs, clad in bulky coats, and carrying automatic weapons, stepped inside. Problem, Doc? The lead thug sneered. Looks like you got a rat. Dr. Miles stumbled back in terror. The thugs raised their weapons. There was no time for talk. Izuku moved. He was a blur of black cloth and controlled motion. He used a smoke pellet from his belt to flood the room with disorienting smoke. He vaulted over a lab table, using the lessons from the manor's rooftops. He engaged the first thug, not with a bone-shattering kick, but with a series of quick, precise strikes to the man's wrist and elbow, forcing him to drop his weapon. A final, sharp blow to the temple, and the man crumpled. The second thug opened fire, spraying bullets wildly into the smoke. Izuku dove behind a cryostasis container. The bullets sparked against the reinforced metal. He needed an edge. He needed to end this. He focused, reaching for the tiny ember of one for all. He channeled it, not into his fist or his leg, but into a single finger. A 5% flicker, no more. He flicked his finger, and a compressed pellet of air, a miniature, almost invisible Delaware smash, shot across the room and shattered the overhead light panel, plunging the lab into darkness, and showering the remaining thug with sparks and broken glass. In the man's moment of shocked confusion, Izuku was on him, a silent shadow. The fight was over in seconds. By the time Bruce arrived, the two thugs were bound securely with high-tensile wire from Izuku's utility belt. Dr. Miles was sitting on the floor, the stolen hard drive at his feet, sobbing with a mixture of fear and relief. The situation was contained. Handled. Later, back in the cave, Bruce stood silently before the security footage from the lab, watching it play out on the main screen. He watched Izuku's stealth, his compassion, his efficiency, and the final, brilliant, and restrained use of his power. He saw a perfect synthesis of their two worlds. He turned to Izuku, who was standing nervously, expecting a lecture for disobeying orders. Instead, Bruce walked to one of the display cases. It was covered with a sheet. With a single, smooth motion, he pulled the sheet away. Inside, resting on a mannequin, was a suit of armor. It was crafted from the same advanced materials as the Batsuit, but it was designed differently. The chest plate was a deep, defiant red, emblazoned with a stylized yellow R. The sleeves and leggings were a familiar shade of dark green. The gauntlets were armored, practical, and the cape was a bright, hopeful yellow on the inside. I had this in development for a long time, Bruce said, his voice softer than Izuku had ever heard it. An idea? A symbol. He turned to Izuku, and his weary eyes held a glimmer of something Izuku had never seen in him before. Hope. You said Gotham needs a light. A brighter symbol to complement the dark one. You were right. He opened the glass case. You've earned this. Robin is a legend in my world. A bird that sings at the dawn. It's time Gotham had a new dawn. Izuku stared at the suit, his vision blurring with tears. The colors of hope. The symbol of a partner. A name. A purpose. He touched R on the chest, the cool metal a conduit for the warmth spreading through his own. His dream was alive. He was a hero again. He looked at Bruce, at his mentor, his savior, and made a silent vow. He would be the hero Bruce needed. He would be the light for Gotham's darkness. He would make him proud. I won't let you down, Bruce, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. And in the cold, dark heart of the Batcave, the symbol of Robin was reborn. The air in the Batcave was always cold, a primordial chill that emanated from the very stone. But tonight, for Izuku Midoriya, it was charged with an electric hum of anticipation that had nothing to do with the cave's state-of-the-art power systems. It was the feeling of a dream, once dead and buried, now resurrected in crimson, green, and yellow. He stood before the open display case, the Robin suit waiting. It wasn't a costume, it was a statement. The reinforced Nomex fabric felt cool and substantial under his fingertips. The chest plate, a deep, arterial red, was a composite ceramic designed to stop a knife or a small caliber bullet. The stylized R was not merely painted on but was a hardened polymer, a target deliberately designed to draw fire away from the head and towards the most heavily armored part of the torso. A brilliant, terrifying piece of psychological engineering. "It is a heavy burden, Master Izuku," a quiet voice said from behind him. Izuku turned to see Alfred standing there, holding a tray with a single glass of water. The old butler's face was a mask of placid professionalism, but his eyes held a deep, melancholic wisdom. "I know you are more than capable," Alfred continued, his gaze lingering on the suit. "But this city, this life, it asks more than capability. It asks for pieces of your soul. Do be careful which ones you give away." Izuku nodded, his throat suddenly tight. "I will, Alfred." "Thank you." He knew Alfred had seen other boys don this symbol. He had seen the hope, and he had seen the tragedy. The weight of that unspoken history settled on Izuku's shoulders before the cape ever did. He suited up. The process was a ritual of clicks, snaps, and the whisper of tightening straps. The green leggings and sleeves were flexible, designed for maximum agility. The gauntlets were heavier than they looked, packed with miniaturized technology. The utility belt, a familiar concept but infinitely more advanced than what he was used to at UA, felt solid and reassuring against his waist. Finally, the domino mask. He secured it, and looking at his reflection in the dark glass of the display case, he saw a stranger. He saw a hero. He saw Robin. A low growl of an engine starting up echoed through the cave. Izuku turned to see the Batmobile, its armor plates shifting and its jet turbine glowing with hellish orange light. The canopy hissed open. From the driver's seat, Batman's voice, filtered through the cowl's modulator, was a stark command. "Robin! It's time!" The ride through the subterranean tunnels and out onto the rain-slicked streets of Gotham was a lesson in controlled chaos. The Batmobile moved with a predator's grace, weaving through traffic like a phantom shark. Inside the cockpit, the silence was absolute, broken only by the crackle of encrypted police scanners and the hum of the vehicle's systems. A holographic display shimmered over the dashboard, showing a 3D map of their destination, a disused cannery in the industrial district. "The target is a weapons deal." Batman's voice was a low growl, all business. "An arms dealer known as the Quartermaster is selling stolen military hardware to a new faction of the Falcone crime family trying to make a name for themselves. Standard search and destroy. We neutralize the hostiles, secure the weapons, and leave the package for the GCPD. Your role is support and containment. You will follow my lead. No improvisation. No communication with the hostiles. Am I clear?" "Clear," Izuku replied, his own voice sounding small in the armored cockpit. The cold, tactical nature of the briefing was a world away from the passionate, often chaotic planning sessions with his classmates back at UA. This wasn't a school exercise. This was war. They arrived in silence, the Batmobile's engine cutting off as it slid into the shadow of a neighboring warehouse. They exited the vehicle and ascended to the rooftops with practiced ease, Batman using his grapnel gun, Izuku using a combination of his own athleticism and a similar, smaller device from his belt. The cannery roof was a slick, treacherous landscape of rusting vents and grimy skylights. Rain fell in a steady, miserable curtain, turning the city's neon glow into a watercolor blur. Batman knelt at the edge of the roof, a dark gargoyle surveying his domain. He held up a strange, multi-lens device, scanning the building below. "Thermal confirms 18 hostiles," he murmured, his voice now a whisper in Izuku's earpiece. 16 inside, 2 lookouts on the east and west catwalks. High-caliber automatic rifles. The quartermaster is in the center, near the primary crate. We enter through the main ventilation shaft. I'll take the west lookout, you take the east. On my mark. Silent takedowns only. Izuku's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This was it. He took a deep breath, reaching for the small, warm ember of one for all. He let a tiny fraction, no more than 3%, flow through him. It wasn't enough to produce a visible crackle of lightning, but it sharpened his senses, tightened his muscles, and made the world seem to move just a fraction of a second slower. Mark! They moved as one. Batman was a whisper of displaced air, a shadow flowing over the rooftop. Izuku was a flicker, a barely seen dart of motion. He dropped onto the catwalk behind his target, the man's heavy coat and boots masking the sound of his landing. The lookout turned, his eyes widening in shock as he saw the flash of red and green. Before a sound could escape his lips, Izuku's hand chopped down on the nerve cluster at the base of his neck. The man crumpled without a sound, his rifle clattering softly against the steel grating. Izuku caught it before it could make any real noise, securing the man with a zip tie. Efficiency. Precision. The Batman method. He met Batman at the designated entry point, a large, rusted ventilation fan. With a tool from his gauntlet, Batman disabled it, and they dropped into the cavernous interior of the cannery. The air inside was thick with the smell of rust, brine, and cordite. Below them, a deal was in progress. Men in cheap suits and expensive coats stood around a large wooden crate, their faces illuminated by a single, harsh work light. Rifles that looked like they belonged on a battlefield were being passed around and examined. I take the 5 on the left. You take the 3 on the right. Disarm and disable. Go. There was no countdown. Batman simply dropped from the rafters, his cape spreading like the wings of some great, dark angel. He was a force of pure, terrifying momentum. A thug looked up, his shout of alarm cut short as Batman's armored boot connected with his jaw. The fight was a masterpiece of brutal choreography. Every move Batman made was designed to end a confrontation in the shortest possible time. A batarang disarmed one man, a precise elbow strike shattered the collarbone of another, a sweep of the cape and a spin kick sent a third crashing into a stack of empty barrels. He was a shadow, a whisper, a conclusion. Izuku, on the other hand, was a storm. He landed on the opposite side of the room, a blur of motion. His shoot style, even without the overwhelming power of a 45% smash, was a whirlwind of acrobatic grace and pinpoint force. He flowed between the 3 thugs, his movements fluid and unpredictable. He kicked a rifle from one man's hands, the weapon spinning into the air. He spun, his other leg sweeping out to buckle the knees of the second thug. He vaulted off a crate, his body a twisting arc, and brought both heels down on the shoulders of the third, driving him to the floor. It was over in less than 5 seconds. He was faster than Batman. Stronger, too. Even with just a sliver of one for all, his physical abilities were fundamentally superhuman. He could see Bruce notice it, the slight, almost imperceptible tilt of his head as Izuku took down his targets with an explosive speed that bordered on the impossible in this world. The remaining thugs, caught between the terrifying shadow and the impossible whirlwind, panicked. The firefight that erupted was brief and one-sided. Izuku moved like a dancer through the hail of bullets, the ingrained instincts of 100 battles guiding him. Danger sense, though muted, was a faint thrum at the base of his skull, a gentle nudge that told him where to be and where not to be. He ricocheted a customized disc off a steel beam, hitting a gunman in the back of the head. He used a smoke pellet to obscure a machine gunner's view before disarming him with a lightning-fast rush. Soon, only one thug remained conscious and armed. He was young, no older than 20, with desperation etched into his face. He was backed against the wall, his rifle trembling in his hands. "Stay back!" he screamed, his voice cracking with fear. "I swear to God, I'll shoot!" Batman began to advance, a dark, inexorable predator. Izuku saw the pure terror in the young man's eyes and held up a hand. "Wait," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. Batman stopped, his white lenses narrowing. Izuku took a cautious step forward, his hands open and non-threatening. "It's okay," he said softly, his voice devoid of menace. "We're not going to kill you. Just put the gun down." "No way," the kid stammered, his eyes darting between Robin and the looming shadow of Batman. "You're with him. He breaks people, he does what he has to," Izuku admitted, taking another slow step. "But you don't have to be one of them." "What's your name?" The question was so unexpected it threw the young man off balance. "WH what? Your name." "What is it?" "Leo." "Okay, Leo. Why are you here?" Izuku asked, his voice full of a genuine curiosity that was utterly alien to a Gotham crime scene. "You don't look like the other guys. You look scared. You don't want to be doing this, do you?" Leo's bravado began to crumble. "My mom's sick. The hospital bills." Falcone offered cash. "Quick job," he said. "Just watch a crate," he said. Izuku nodded, his expression full of empathy. I get it. I do. But this isn't the way. This path only leads to a prison cell or a grave. But it's not too late to get off it. Put the gun down, Leo. Testify against Falcone. The DA can offer you protection, a new start. He could see the kid wavering. Hope was beginning to battle fear in his eyes. This was it. This was what being a hero was all about. Not just stopping the crime, but saving the person. From his earpiece, Batman's voice was a venomous whisper. Robin. Cease communication. Neutralize the target. Now. Izuku ignored him. He took one more step. Please, Leo. Make the right choice. Leo's rifle lowered an inch. His shoulders slumped. And in that moment of hesitation, a black shape moved with impossible speed. A batarang flew through the air and struck Leo's hand, sending his rifle clattering to the concrete floor. Before Leo could even cry out in pain, Batman was on him, lifting him by the front of his jacket and slamming him against the wall. You talk, you get a knife in your back and Blackgate. Batman growled, his voice a promise of violence. You keep your mouth shut, you might live to see your next birthday. He then drove a fist into Leo's gut, and the young man collapsed, unconscious. Izuku stared, horrified. What did you do? He was giving up. I almost had him. Batman turned, his cape swirling around him. The white lenses of his cowl seemed to burn into Izuku. You had nothing, he snarled. You had a scared boy with a gun who was a second away from a panic-induced massacre. You showed him sentiment. In this city, sentiment is a liability. It gets people killed. He pointed to the unconscious form of Leo. He is not a victim. He is a hostile who made a choice. Your empathy is a weapon the enemy will use against you. Learn that, or you won't last a week. Without another word, Batman turned and began methodically securing the weapon's crate, his movements cold and detached, as if the human wreckage scattered around them was nothing more than a logistical problem to be solved. Izuku was left standing in the middle of the cannery, the warmth of his small victory extinguished by the icy reality of his mentor's methods. The night wasn't over. A few of the Falcone thugs had escaped in the initial chaos, fleeing to the rooftops. They can't be allowed to report back, Batman stated, firing his grapnel into the night sky. We hunt. The chase was a frantic, desperate scramble across the slick, rain-swept rooftops of Gotham's industrial district. Izuku, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and simmering anger, easily kept pace. He was a flash of color against the grim, gray skyline, his movements impossibly fast, impossibly agile. They cornered the last runner on the edge of a tall smokestack. The man was burly, with a face like a bulldog, and he was breathing in ragged, panicked gasps. He skidded on a patch of wet soot, his arms pinwheeling wildly. For a horrifying second, he teetered on the edge of the roof, 60 feet above the unforgiving pavement of the alley below. Then he fell. A scream tore from the man's throat, a raw, desperate sound that was swallowed by the roar of the city. Izuku didn't think. He didn't calculate. He reacted. Save him. The command came from the very core of his being. Dark, whip-like tendrils of pure energy erupted from his fingertips, a power he had used countless times before but had not yet manifested in this world. Black Whip. The quirk of the fifth user, Lariat. The tendrils shot through the rain, impossibly fast, and wrapped around the falling man's ankle just as gravity was about to claim him. Izuku dug his heels into the rooftop, the minimal power of one for all reinforcing his stance. He gritted his teeth, the strain immense, and hauled the man back up. The thug, a man of at least 250 pounds, was yanked back over the ledge and deposited onto the roof in a sputtering, terrified heap. He lay there, staring up at the dark sky, gasping for air like a landed fish. Izuku stood over him, his own chest heaving, the black tendrils retracting back into his arm. He had done it. He had saved him. It was a clean victory. No one died. Then Batman landed silently behind him. Izuku turned, a proud, triumphant smile on his face, ready to explain the new facet of his power. The smile died when he saw the expression on Batman's face, or rather, the utter lack of one. The cowl's mouth was set in a grim, hard line. What did I tell you about improvisation? Batman's voice was dangerously quiet. I saved him! Izuku protested, gesturing to the whimpering man on the roof. He was going to die! He was a non-factor, Batman stated, his voice like chipping ice. A loose end that was about to tie itself. You expended energy and revealed a new ability to save a man who tried to kill us minutes ago. He strode past Izuku, his heavy boots echoing on the rooftop. He stood over the thug, who was just beginning to push himself up. Get up, Batman commanded. The man scrambled to his feet, holding his hands up. Okay. You got me. I give up. Don't hurt me, man, please. Batman looked from the thug to Izuku, his glowing lenses seeming to pierce right through him. You saved him, Robin. Now what? He runs again. We chase him again. He gets away, he reports to his boss. He gets caught, he goes to Blackgate, is out in 6 months, and kills a shopkeeper for $20. Your act of sentiment did not save a life. It merely postponed a death and created future victims. You didn't solve a problem. You created a cycle. Before Izuku could form a reply, Batman moved. It was a single, fluid motion. A step forward and a perfectly executed right cross to the thug's jaw. The crack of the impact was sharp and final. The man's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed, utterly unconscious. Batman stood over the body, then turned back to Izuku. The mission is to secure the hostiles, he said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. This is secure. What you did was a dangerous, sentimental distraction. Do not ever make that mistake again. He fired his grapnel gun and swung away into the night, leaving Izuku alone on the rooftop with the rain, an unconscious criminal, and the bitter, metallic taste of his own ideals. The silence in the Batcave upon their return was a crushing weight. Bruce removed his cowl, his face slick with sweat and rain, his expression as hard and unyielding as granite. He didn't speak to Izuku. He didn't even look at him. He moved to the Bat computer and began analyzing the data from the recovered weapons, his focus absolute, as if Izuku didn't exist. Izuku, still in his Robin suit, felt a profound and hollow ache in his chest. He had done everything a hero was supposed to do. He had been strong, fast, and brave. He had saved a life, and he was being treated as if he had failed catastrophically. He looked at his reflection in a dark monitor. The red of his suit seemed too loud, the yellow of his cape a childish mockery. He felt the phantom energy of Blackwhip and the faint warmth of One for All under his skin. These were the tools of a hero. Why did they feel so wrong here? Because this place is wrong, Ninth. The voice was a whisper in his mind, soft but clear. It was a woman's voice, imbued with a gentle strength he recognized from the dreamlike vestiges. Nana Shimura. He controls through fear. Her voice continued, a sad ethereal echo. He dominates. He seeks to impose his will on the world to force it into a shape he can accept. It is a noble goal, born of pain, but the path is a dark one. It is the same logic tyrants have always used. Another voice joined hers, this one a deep, familiar rumble that made Izuku's heart ache with a homesickness so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. Young Midoriya. A symbol of peace inspires. He does not intimidate. He lifts people up. He does not strike them down when they are beaten. Remember what I taught you. The power you have is not for controlling others. It is for saving them. All of them. All Might's voice was not a command, but a profound, sorrowful reminder. A third, harsher voice, one Izuku didn't recognize, cut through the others. The man is a cage builder. He seeks to put the world in a cage to keep it safe. All for One sought to own the world. The motivation is different. The underlying desire for absolute control? Frighteningly similar. The comparison struck Izuku with the force of a physical blow. All for One. The ultimate evil. A monster who stole lives and futures, who saw people as pawns to be manipulated or discarded. To compare Bruce, his mentor, the man who saved him, to that monster, it was blasphemy. It was unthinkable. And yet, he looked at Bruce's back, at the rigid posture, the absolute focus, the utter dismissal of the human element he had just dealt with. He saw the cold calculus, the belief that his way was the only way, that any deviation was a catastrophic failure. He saw the demand for absolute obedience. Izuku's blood ran cold. The ideological crack he had sensed during training wasn't a crack. It was a chasm, a fundamental, unbridgeable divide in the definition of the word hero. He had dreamed of being a hero his entire life. He had finally been given the chance to live that dream again. But as he stood in the cold, oppressive silence of the Batcave, he was forced to confront a terrifying new question. In this world of shadows and moral decay, what if his dream, and his mentor's mission, were two entirely different things? The partnership, forged in the crucible of the cave, was already showing signs of stress fractures. In the week following their first patrol, a tense, professional silence had fallen between Bruce and Izuku. They trained together, they patrolled the city as Batman and Robin, but the warmth of mentorship had been replaced by the cold efficiency of a commander and his soldier. Izuku performed his duties with flawless precision, a whirlwind of green and red who moved with a grace that was alien to Gotham's grimy rooftops. But he kept his thoughts to himself, the chasm opened by their clash in the cannery widening with every silent ride in the Batmobile. The whispers began on a Tuesday. A Gotham University philosophy professor, a man renowned for his work on existential dread, was found dead in his office. There were no signs of forced entry, no wounds, no discernible cause of death. Except for the look on his face. His eyes were wide, his mouth locked in a silent scream of such profound, abject terror that the first officer on the scene had to be sedated. That night, Batman and Robin stood in the sealed-off office. The air was thick with the scent of old books, stale coffee, and something else, something faint and earthy, like freshly turned soil after a storm. Izuku, his senses subtly enhanced by a low hum of One for All, found it deeply unsettling. The office was a testament to a mind undone. Books were torn from shelves, their pages ripped out. The professor's heavy oak desk was covered in deep, frantic gouges, as if he had tried to claw his way through the solid wood. No toxins in the preliminary coroner's report, Batman growled, his voice a low thrum in Izuku's ear as he scanned the room with a multi-spectrum visor. No anomalous energy readings. The official cause of death is cardiac arrest. Izuku knelt by the desk, his gloved fingers tracing the deep scratches. This isn't just fear, Bruce, he murmured, his analytical mind kicking into gear. This is primal, the amygdala completely overriding the frontal lobe. He wasn't scared of something. He was experiencing the platonic ideal of terror itself. He looked at the victim, a man whose life's work was to understand fear, and saw only a hollowed-out shell. He felt a pang of profound empathy. This was a violation not just of the body, but of the soul. Back in the Batcave, the analysis began. Bruce synthesized a sample of the air from the office, the Bat computer's holographic display breaking down its chemical components. There, Batman said, pointing to a complex, unfamiliar molecule chain rendered in glowing blue. A unique airborne neurotoxin. It binds directly to fear receptors in the brain, inducing a state of perpetual, extreme panic until the cardiovascular system gives out. The earthy scent is a byproduct of one of the base compounds, a rare strain of mushroom known for its hallucinogenic properties, modified and weaponized. Izuku watched the data stream across the screen, his stomach churning. He weaponized fear. Turned an emotion into a poison. He's done it before, Bruce said, pulling up a new set of files. A mugshot appeared on the screen, a gaunt, severe-looking man with intelligent, haunted eyes. Dr. Jonathan Crane, fired from Gotham University for his unorthodox experiments in phobia treatment. He believes fear is the great purifier, the one true force that can control humanity. He calls himself the Scarecrow. Izuku stared at the file, at the history of grotesque experiments, of patients driven insane, of a brilliant mind warped by obsession. He saw a man who had taken a fundamental human emotion and twisted it into an instrument of torture. As they geared up for patrol, the tension in Izuku finally boiled over. They were in the armored belly of the Batmobile, speeding through the subterranean tunnels that connected the cave to the city. The silence was heavy, oppressive. He uses fear as his weapon, Izuku said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but it held an undercurrent of accusation. Batman's response was a non-committal grunt. Just like you, Izuku pressed, turning in his seat to face the dark, cowled figure at the wheel. The symbol on your chest, the shadows you move in, the voice you use, it's all designed to terrify people, to make criminals afraid of the dark. It's effective, Batman stated, his eyes fixed on the tunnel ahead. It's the same tactic, Izuku insisted, his voice rising with a passion he could no longer contain. Crane tortures people with fear until their hearts give out. You terrorize them until there were breaks. So I have to ask, how are we different? The Batmobile screeched to a halt in a staging area just beneath a city street, the sudden stop throwing Izuku forward against his harness. Batman killed the engine. The resulting silence was absolute, a black hole of sound. He turned his head slowly, the white lenses of the cowl fixing on Izuku, cold and impassive. You want to know the difference? His voice was low, a predator's growl. The difference is control. Crane is an addict, a zealot who has surrendered to his obsession. He unleashes chaos. He is a sledgehammer, smashing everything he touches. The fear I use is a scalpel. It is a precise, controlled tool, applied surgically to a specific element, the criminal mind. I don't target the innocent. I don't seek to destroy. I seek to intimidate, to deter, to create a moment of hesitation in a criminal's mind that allows me to neutralize him without lethal force. But it's still fear, Izuku argued, his hands clenched into fists. You're fighting a monster by becoming a different kind of monster. You're proving Crane's point for him, that fear is the only thing that works, the only thing that can control people. This city is not your home, Robin. Batman's voice was like chipping granite. You haven't seen what I've seen. You haven't watched this city's institutions crumble, its protectors turn corrupt, its people surrender to apathy. Hope is a luxury Gotham can't afford. It requires a foundation of safety, of order. I am that foundation. Fear is the cement that holds it together. It is a necessary tool in an endless war. Izuku slumped back in his seat, the cold finality of Bruce's words washing over him. He saw no room for debate, no hint of doubt. Bruce wasn't just using fear. He believed in it. It was the central tenet of his faith, the gospel of the Bat. The hypocrisy was staggering. To fight a man who weaponized fear, his mentor was preparing to deploy his own arsenal of terror. The chasm between them had just become a canyon. Let's go, Batman said, restarting the engine. Crane's toxin requires a significant amount of water for aerosolization. There are only 3 facilities in the city capable of that kind of dispersal. We'll start with the oldest, the Gotham City Water Treatment Plant. The plant was a maze of crumbling brick and rusting steel on the industrial outskirts of the city. It sat under a sickly yellow sky, silent and foreboding. A strange, sweet-smelling fog, thicker than the usual Gotham smog, clung to the ground around the perimeter. He's already started, Batman said, his cowl's sensors analyzing the air. Toxin concentration is low, but rising. He's planning to dump the primary batch into the main reservoir. It will contaminate the water supply for the entire city. They entered through a rooftop access hatch, descending into a cathedral of steam and iron. The air inside was thick with the toxin, not yet potent enough to be debilitating, but strong enough to put a razor's edge on every shadow, to make every drip of water sound like a footstep. Izuku could feel his heart rate elevate, a low thrum of primal anxiety buzzing just beneath his skin. He pushed it down, focusing on his training. They moved through the plant like ghosts, Batman a solid block of darkness, Robin a silent, acrobatic flicker. They found the first victims in a control room, 2 plant workers, tied to their chairs, their faces pale, their eyes darting around at unseen horrors. They were mumbling incoherently, trapped in their own private hells. As Batman worked to disable the automated pump systems from the control panel, he gave Izuku a new objective. The main overflow valve needs to be manually shut. It's on the central platform, 2 levels down. It's our only failsafe if I can't stop the pumps in time. Go. Avoid contact if possible. Izuku nodded and slipped out of the room. He navigated the labyrinth of catwalks and gantries with practiced ease. The concentration of the toxin was stronger here, and the whispers of the vestiges in his mind were becoming agitated. This is wrong, Ninth. This place feels like a wound. Nana Shimura's voice was a mournful sigh. Stay focused, kid. Fear is just a signal. Don't let it become your reality. The gruff voice of the second user was a grounding force. He reached the central platform, a wide, circular area dominated by a massive, red wheel valve. But he wasn't alone. A man in a worker's jumpsuit was standing by the valve, his back to Izuku. He was holding a heavy pipe wrench, his knuckles white. "Hello?" Izuku called out softly. The man spun around, and Izuku's breath caught in his throat. The man's face was a mask of pure terror. His eyes were bloodshot and dilated, his cheeks wet with tears. He was looking at Izuku, but he wasn't seeing him. He was seeing something else entirely. "No, no, get away from me!" The worker shrieked, his voice raw with panic. He brandished the wrench like a club. "The eyes! The 1,000 eyes! They're crawling all over you! Oh God, make them stop!" From his earpiece, Batman's voice was a sharp, cold command. "Robin, report. I have a hostile on my position. I have a civilian." Izuku replied, keeping his voice calm, his hands held open. "He's been exposed. He's agitated. Is he a threat?" "He's armed," Izuku said cautiously. "But he's terrified. He's not a criminal, Bruce, he's a victim. In his state, there is no difference." Batman's voice was devoid of sympathy. "He is an obstacle between you and the objective. Incapacitate him. Use non-lethal force, but be decisive." "We don't have time for this." The worker, spurred on by his hallucinations, let out a guttural cry and charged, swinging the heavy wrench in a wide, clumsy arc. Izuku dodged easily, the man's movements telegraphed by his panic. He could end this in a second. A quick strike to the temple. A nerve pinch. The application of cold, hard physics. The Batman way. But as he looked into the man's terrified eyes, he didn't see an obstacle. He didn't see a hostile. He saw Leo from the cannery. He saw the professor in his office. He saw another soul drowning in the darkness of this city. And the voices of the vestiges, of All Might, of his own core beliefs, screamed in unison, "Save him!" "No!" Izuku said, both to his mentor and to himself. He dodged another wild swing, this time closing the distance. Instead of attacking, he grabbed the man's wrist, using a simple joint lock to halt the wrench's momentum. He didn't apply enough pressure to break or dislocate, just enough to control. "I'm not going to hurt you," Izuku said, his voice firm but gentle. The man struggled, his muscles trembling with adrenaline. "I'm not what you think you see. Look at me. My name is Robin." Suddenly, Batman was there. He dropped from a gantry above, landing with a heavy, intimidating thud that shook the metal platform. He advanced on the worker, a looming specter of judgment. The worker's panic escalated into a full-blown, blood-curdling scream. He ripped his arm from Izuku's grasp and scrambled backwards, away from the terrifying shadow of the bat. "Stay out of this, Robin," Batman commanded. "I will handle it." "No!" Izuku shouted, planting himself firmly between Batman and the terrified man. "You'll handle him like you handled Leo. You'll break him. That's not what he needs right now." Batman stopped, his white lenses narrowing in disbelief and fury at this blatant act of insubordination. "You are compromising the mission for a single, panicked civilian. Get out of my way." "His name is Frank," Izuku yelled, his eyes having flicked to the man's name tag on his jumpsuit. "He's not a hostile or an obstacle. He's a person. And he needs help, not a beating." He turned his back on his mentor, a profound and dangerous act of defiance. He faced the cowering man, who was now backed against the safety railing, the churning, chemical-laced water of the treatment vats just feet below. "Frank, listen to me," Izuku said, lowering his voice again, projecting an aura of calm he didn't feel. "I know you're scared. I can't imagine what you're seeing right now. But it's not real. It's a poison in the air. It's playing tricks on your mind. It feels real." Frank sobbed, clutching his head. "The whispers, they say she's gone. They say my little girl is gone." Izuku's heart clenched. He saw a flicker of Ari's face, of her terrified eyes when he first met her. This was a pain he understood. "Who?" Izuku asked gently. "Who's gone?" "My daughter. Lily," Frank choked out. "The toxin, it's showing me her empty room, her favorite bear all torn up. It's telling me I wasn't there to protect her." This was Scarecrow's genius. He didn't just create monsters. He found the one thing you loved most in the world and showed you its destruction. Behind him, Izuku could feel the palpable rage radiating from Batman, but he ignored it. He took a slow step towards Frank. Frank, that's the poison talking. It's a lie. Lily is safe. She's at home, waiting for her dad to come back from work, Izuku said, his voice resonating with an unshakable conviction. He was channeling All Might now, the boundless, unwavering hope of the symbol of peace. I know what it feels like to think you've failed someone. But you haven't. You're fighting for her right now. You're fighting this poison, and you're winning. He was only a few feet away now. You know what I see, Frank? I don't see the monsters you see. I see a man who loves his daughter more than anything. I see a father, and a father's love is stronger than any poison. You just have to remember that. Remember Lily's face. Her smile. Hold on to that. It's real. The fear is not. He extended a hand. Take my hand, Frank. Let me help you get back to her. For a long, agonizing moment, Frank stared at Izuku's outstretched hand, his face a battleground of terror and dawning hope. He looked from Izuku's earnest, unmasked face to the terrifying, inhuman shape of Batman standing in the shadows behind him. He saw the monster, and he saw the man. With a shuddering sob, Frank reached out and took Izuku's hand. The wrench clattered from his other hand, falling to the platform with a loud clang. He collapsed into Izuku's arms, his body shaking with violent, cathartic sobs. The fight was gone, replaced by an exhausted, grieving humanity. It's okay, Izuku whispered, supporting the man's weight. It's over. You're safe. The pumps are accelerating. Batman's voice cut through the moment, clipped and furious. Shut the valve. Now. Izuku gently lowered Frank to a sitting position against the console, then scrambled to the giant red wheel. It was rusted tight. He gritted his teeth, pouring a full 5% of one for all into his arms and shoulders. The green lightning, invisible to the others, crackled under his skin. With a groan of protesting metal, the valve began to turn. He spun it until he could spin it no more, the flow of the toxin to the reservoir cut off. Just as he finished, a figure in a horrifying burlap sack mask and tattered clothes appeared on a high catwalk. The Scarecrow. Such a touching display. Crane's voice rasped through a speaker in his mask, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Hope. A beautiful, fragile little lie we tell ourselves in the dark, but the dark always wins. Fear is the only truth. He held up a detonator. This facility is lost, but my research is not. He pressed a button. Explosives, planted throughout the plant, detonated in a chain reaction. The platform shuddered, and a section of catwalk above them collapsed. Batman tackled Izuku, pulling him and the still dazed Frank out of the way of the falling debris. Scarecrow is getting away! Izuku yelled over the roar of explosions and hissing steam. The mission was to stop the contamination. Batman countered, his grip on Izuku's arm like a vice. The mission is complete. We're leaving. He dragged them towards an emergency exit as the plant began to tear itself apart around them. They stood on a rooftop a mile away, watching the emergency services converge on the smoking ruin of the water treatment plant. Frank, the worker, was now safely in the hands of paramedics, wrapped in a shock blanket and being treated for toxin exposure. He had given them Scarecrow's location within the plant before he was taken away. The rain had started again, washing the soot from the air. He got away, Izuku said, the words tasting like ash. Because I took the time to save that man, Scarecrow escaped. He expected Bruce to agree, to drive the point of his failure home. Instead, Batman was silent for a long time, his back to Izuku as he stared out at the city. You proved a point tonight, Robin, Batman finally said, his voice a low, neutral rumble. He didn't sound angry anymore. He sounded weary. You demonstrated that empathy can be a tool. You reached a man lost to a terror I could not comprehend and pulled him back. Izuku felt a small, cautious flicker of pride. He had done it. He had shown Bruce there was another way. But do not mistake one victory for a winning strategy, Batman continued, turning to face him. The faint light from the fires below cast his cowl in demonic relief. What you did tonight might work on a frightened father, a good man having the worst day of his life. It worked on a desperate kid in a warehouse. It will not work on the true monsters of this city. It will not work on the Joker. It will not work on Zash. It will not work on men whose souls are already rotted through with a depravity you cannot even imagine. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over Izuku. Your compassion is a light, Izuku. But in this city, a light does not always make things clearer. Sometimes it just shows the monsters where to strike. What you see as your greatest strength, they will see as your greatest weakness. And they will exploit it until it gets you, and everyone you try to save killed. He turned and fired his grapnel, swinging away into the darkness without another word. Izuku stood alone on the rooftop, the rain plastering his cape to his back. He had won the battle for Frank's soul, but he had lost the war for his mentors. Bruce had seen his success not as an alternative, but as an exception, a dangerous, sentimental anomaly that proved the rule. He looked down at his own hands. He had used empathy and hope to dispel a man's deepest fears. It was the most heroic thing he had done since arriving in this dark, broken world. And his mentor, the Batman, had just told him it was a fatal flaw. The canyon between them was now a galaxy. They wore the same colors, fought in the same war, but their missions were no longer aligned. One fought to contain the darkness. The other fought to bring the light. And Izuku was beginning to realize that in the heart of Gotham, those two goals might be mutually exclusive. The days that followed the confrontation at the water treatment plant were steeped in a cold, suffocating silence. It was a silence that filled the vast emptiness of the Batcave, a silence that sat between Bruce and Izuku at the long, polished dining table in the manor, a silence that screamed in the confines of the Batmobile as they raced through the city's concrete canyons. They were a team, a dynamic duo in motion, but they were no longer partners in spirit. They were two separate orbits, held together by the gravity of a shared mission but spinning on different axes. Izuku performed his duties with a chilling efficiency that even Bruce had to respect. He was faster, sharper, his analysis more incisive than ever. But the light in his eyes, the eager, almost boyish enthusiasm that had so intrigued Bruce, was gone. It had been replaced by a watchful, calculating intensity. He no longer questioned Bruce's methods, no longer offered alternatives rooted in empathy. He simply observed, catalogued, and executed his orders with the precision of a scalpel. He was becoming the soldier Bruce had wanted, and the transformation was quietly terrifying. The change was born of a question that haunted Izuku's every waking moment. How did he get like this? How did a man with the resources to change the world, the intellect to outthink any foe, and the drive to wage a one-man war, become so utterly convinced that hope was a liability and fear the only solution? Bruce Wayne wasn't born the Batman. He was forged. Izuku, the eternal analyst, needed to understand the crucible. His quest for answers began one night when Bruce was away, meeting with Lucius Fox under the guise of a late-night corporate emergency. Izuku was alone in the cave, the rhythmic drip of water and the hum of the Bat computer the only sounds. He had finished his own training regimen, his muscles burning with a familiar ache, and found himself wandering the vast, shadowy space. His eyes were drawn to a section of the cave he never paid much attention to before. Past the trophy room with its giant penny and robotic dinosaur, tucked away in a less trafficked alcove, was a row of illuminated display cases. His own Robin's suit, and Batman's current armor, occupied the two most prominent positions. But further down, shrouded in a thin layer of dust and shadow, was another. This one was empty. It was clearly a memorial. The lighting was more subdued, reverent. A small, polished brass plaque was affixed to the base. Izuku ran his fingers over it, wiping away the dust. The inscription was simple, heart-wrenching. A good soldier. There was no name. Just a stark, cold epitaph. Who was this soldier? Why was his case empty? Alfred had mentioned. Other boys. Plural. Izuku had seen files on the first Robin, Dick Grayson, a celebrated hero who had moved on, become his own man in another city. Nightwing. His was a success story. But this empty case, this felt like a failure, a grave. A cold knot of dread formed in Izuku's stomach. He turned to the Bat computer, its screens a silent, waiting oracle. He started with the basics, running a search for all known associates of the Batman. He found Nightwing, Batgirl, even a file on a former GCPD commissioner named James Gordon. But he was looking for a ghost. He refined the search. Robin. Operative 2. The system responded. File access restricted. Level 10 clearance required. Alpha Protocol. Bruce's personal clearance. A digital dead end. But Izuku wasn't just a hero. He was a nerd. He had spent his childhood analyzing heroes, and his time in this world analyzing Batman. He knew how Bruce thought. He didn't just build walls, he built labyrinths. There was always another way in, a maintenance corridor, a forgotten backdoor. He didn't try to brute force the encryption. Instead, he began to sift through terabytes of archived Batmobile maintenance logs, cross-referencing them with patrol records and biometric data from the suit's sensors. It was a tedious, mind-numbing task, but his muttering spurred him on, a low, intense litany of data points. Patrol routes shifted dramatically 4.7 years ago. Increased aggression index noted in combat analysis. Biometrics show elevated cortisol and adrenaline levels sustained for a period of 23 months, consistent with heightened, prolonged stress or a significant traumatic event, he found it. A single, corrupted data fragment in an old patrol log, logged as an anomaly. A mission file that had failed to properly archive and had been shunted to a diagnostic partition. The file was designated simply Ethiopia. JT. The ghost had initials. With trembling fingers, Izuku used the corrupted file's authentication signature as a key, a broken piece of a forgotten lock. The system, recognizing a diagnostic query rather than a direct security breach, granted him access. The files that flooded the screen were not the clean, redacted reports of a finished case. This was the raw, unfiltered source material. It was the digital equivalent of an open wound. The first thing that loaded was a personnel file. A face appeared on the main screen, a photograph taken in the cave. A boy, maybe a year or two older than Izuku, with a shock of black hair and a defiant, rebellious smirk. He wore the Robin costume, but he wore it differently than Dick Grayson in the archival photos, and differently than Izuku did now. He wore it with a swagger, a chip on his shoulder the size of Gotham itself. His eyes, a brilliant, piercing blue, held a fire that was equal parts righteous fury and deep-seated pain. Name, Jason Todd. Status, deceased. Izuku felt a wave of cold wash over him. A good soldier. He read the initial report. Jason, the second Robin, had been tracking his biological mother to the Middle East, against Batman's orders. He'd walked into a trap. The official summary was brief, clinical. Operative ambushed and killed in action during an unsanctioned mission. Body recovered. Perpetrators identified, but that wasn't the truth. It was a bandage over a gaping, septic wound. Izuku clicked on the subfolder labeled, Evidence _uncensored. The first file was an audio log. The file name was simply crowbar.wave. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the mouse. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he was about to cross a line from which there was no return. He was about to look into the abyss that had created the Batman he knew today. He clicked it. The sound that filled the cavern was not of a battle. It was of a beating. A sickening, rhythmic, wet thud, followed by the grunt of the person swinging the weapon, and under it, the sound of a boy's pained whimpers. Then a laugh. A high, manic, utterly unhinged cackle that seemed to slice through the air. Wow, that looked like it really hurt! A gleeful voice shrieked. Now, what hurts more? A? Or B? Forehand? Or backhand? Thud. Crack. The sound of bone breaking. A pained cry. Stop, please. Jason's voice. Yum. Terrified. Broken. A little louder, Birdie. The insane voice giggled. I'm a little hard of hearing. You'll have to speak up. Thud. 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 Izuku felt bile rise in his throat. He slapped a hand over his mouth, his body trembling. This wasn't a fight. This was torture. This was a monster playing with a child. He wanted to turn it off, but he couldn't. He had to bear witness. The audio file ended. The next was a video file, recovered from a damaged satellite feed. The quality was grainy, distorted by heat haze. It showed a dusty, abandoned warehouse. It showed a flash of red and green as Jason, bruised and bloodied beyond recognition, was dragged back inside. It showed a figure with green hair and a purple suit placing a bomb, and then, it showed the warehouse erupting in a violent, blossoming fireball. A silent, final exclamation point of flame and smoke. The video ended in static. Izuku was shaking uncontrollably now, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. This was a horror beyond any villain fight he had ever experienced. The villains he knew were driven by greed, by ideology, by a lust for power. This was sadism for sport. He forced himself to open the final file. The perpetrator. The face that appeared on the screen was a nightmare of white skin, green hair, and a rictus grin carved into a face that promised only madness and death. The Joker. Izuku read his file. It was a litany of atrocities. Mass murder, terrorism, psychological torture. But it was the final entry that made his blood run cold. Current status: incarcerated, Arkham Asylum for the criminally insane, incarcerated. Not executed. Not permanently neutralized. Incarcerated. In a place that the files themselves described as having a revolving door policy when it came to its most famous patient. Prior escapes, 17 times. This monster, this child killer, this architect of unspeakable suffering, had been allowed to escape 17 times to continue his rampage. Izuku stumbled back from the console, his legs weak. He leaned against a cold, steel support beam, his mind a maelstrom of horror and disbelief. He thought of his own world. He thought of All for One, a villain so dangerous he was imprisoned in the deepest, most secure Tartarus, a man whose very existence was a threat to the world. He thought of the Shaiha Saikai, dismantled and its leader stripped of his power permanently. His world, for all its flaws, understood that some evils could not be allowed to fester. But here? In Gotham? A monster like the Joker was treated like a problem to be managed, not a cancer to be excised. He murdered Batman's son, and his punishment was to be sent back to a place he had already escaped from 17 times. The system wasn't just broken. It was insane. It was a cruel, self-perpetuating joke, and Bruce allowed it. The realization hit Izuku with the force of a physical blow. Bruce, the man of absolute control, the master strategist, the Dark Knight who waged an endless war on crime, allowed this cycle to continue. He had recovered Jason's body, put his murderer back in a cage with a broken lock, and then carved "A good soldier" into a plaque, as if Jason's death was a noble, acceptable loss in a war that had no end in sight. A low growl of the Batmobile's engine echoed from the tunnel entrance. Bruce was back. Izuku didn't move. He stood by the support beam, his silhouette framed by the hellish glow of the Joker's file on the screen behind him. He watched as Bruce emerged from the car, his movements weary. He began the process of removing his armor, the clicks and hisses of the suit's mechanisms echoing in the cavern. Bruce froze when he saw Izuku. He followed his gaze to the main screen, to the files that should have been locked away forever. The weary slump of his shoulders vanished, replaced by a rigid, defensive posture. The air in the cave, already cold, dropped another 10 degrees. "What are you doing?" Bruce's voice was dangerously quiet. The Batman was back in control. Izuku didn't answer immediately. He pushed himself off the beam and walked slowly towards the console, his footsteps echoing in the crushing silence. He felt strangely calm, the frantic horror having coalesced into a cold, hard knot of righteous fury in his chest. He gestured to the smiling, defiant face of Jason Todd on the screen. "Who was he, Bruce?" he asked, his voice soft, but laced with steel. "That file is classified," Bruce spit out, his jaw tight. "You had no right." "I asked you a question," Izuku said, his voice rising slightly. "He wore my suit. He had my name. Who was he?" Bruce turned away, presenting his back to Izuku as he placed his gauntlets on a workbench. It was an act of dismissal, of utter refusal. "It's not your concern, Izuku. It's in the past." "The past?" Izuku's voice cracked with disbelief. He strode forward until he was standing right behind Bruce. "I listened to the audio, Bruce. I heard the crowbar. I heard him laughing while he did it. I saw the bomb. That's not the past." That's a wound you never let heal. You just buried it down here in the dark and pretended it didn't exist. Bruce spun around, his face a mask of cold fury. You know nothing about it. You weren't there. You didn't have to pull his body from the rubble. No, I wasn't, Izuku shouted, jabbing a finger towards the screen. But I know what came next. You caught him. You caught the Joker, the man who tortured and murdered your son, and you took him back to Arkham. You put him back in the cage he'd already broken out of 17 times. The accusation hung in the air between them, raw and undeniable. It was the right thing to do, Bruce said, his voice strained. We have a code. We don't kill. We are not executioners. We bring them to justice, and we let the system. The system? Izuku's laugh was a harsh, broken sound. Don't you dare talk to me about the system. It's a joke. It's a revolving door for monsters. How many people has the Joker killed since Jason, Bruce? How many families has he destroyed in his 18th, 19th, 20th escape? All those bodies, all that pain, that's on you. Every life he takes is a life you could have saved if you had just ended it after what he did to Jason. The raw, unfiltered truth of the accusation struck Bruce with the force of a physical blow. The mask of the Batman shattered. For a fleeting second, Izuku saw not the Dark Knight, but a grieving, broken father, his face etched with a pain so profound it was almost sublime. He saw the ghost of a little boy in an alley, watching his own parents die. You had a son, Bruce! Izuku's voice broke, tears of rage and sorrow streaming down his face. He was crying for Jason, for Bruce, for the utter, tragic brokenness of it all. A son! And you let him die! And his killer. His killer is still out there, laughing in a padded cell, waiting for his next chance to do it all over again. He was screaming now, the words echoing off the ancient stone, a primal cry of grief and fury. He had finally pushed Bruce past the point of no return. Bruce Wayne's face, stripped of its mask, became a terrifying blank. The pain vanished, replaced by an icy, absolute resolve. He retreated into the only fortress he had left, the cold, hard logic of his eternal war. He looked at Izuku, not as a partner, not as a ward, but as a subordinate who had fundamentally misunderstood the terms of his service. You are a soldier in a war, Izuku, he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. It was the calm, quiet voice of a man delivering a death sentence. Soldiers die. The words struck Izuku with the force of a physical impact. He recoiled as if he'd been slapped. Soldiers die. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't a rationalization born of grief. It was a philosophy. A core tenet. Bruce saw them all, Dick, Jason, Barbara, himself, as acceptable losses. Expendable assets in a conflict with no victory condition. The last vestiges of Izuku's hero worship crumbled to dust. The man he had looked up to, the dark, complex hero he had tried so desperately to understand, was gone. In his place stood a broken man, a general so consumed by his war that he had forgotten what he was fighting for. He wasn't saving a city. He was managing a graveyard. He wasn't a father who had lost a son. He was a commander who had lost a soldier, and had already factored the loss into his strategy. The fire in Izuku's eyes died, replaced by a cold, chilling calm. The tears stopped. He looked at Bruce, and for the first time, he felt nothing but a profound, bottomless pity. I'm not your soldier, Bruce, he said quietly. He turned and walked away, leaving Bruce standing alone in the heart of his cavernous tomb. He ascended the stairs, leaving the cold and the darkness of the cave behind. He went to his room in the sprawling, empty manor and stood before the window, looking out at the distant, glittering lights of Gotham. A city full of Leos and Franks and countless others, all trapped in the endless, grinding cycle of Batman's war. A cycle of violence, capture, escape, and more violence. A cycle that had consumed one Robin and was now trying to shape another into a tool for its perpetuation. He looked at his own reflection in the dark glass. He saw the Robin mask he had not yet removed. He saw the determined set of his own jaw. He thought of Jason Todd's defiant smirk. He thought of the Joker's laughing face. He thought of Bruce's dead, empty eyes. Soldiers die. A vow formed in the quiet of his shattered heart. It was not a loud, passionate promise like the one he had made to All Might. This was a cold, silent, an absolute conviction, forged in the crucible of another boy's murder. I will not be your soldier. I will not be your sacrifice. And I will not let this cycle continue. He would save this city. Not by perpetuating the war, but by ending it. He would do what Bruce was too broken, too compromised to do. He would find a permanent solution. He would break the wheel. A symbol of peace saves everyone. And to save the people of Gotham, he would have to save them from the villains, from the broken system, and if necessary, from the Batman himself. The path forward was no longer clear, but the destination was. He would bring a final, lasting peace to this city. No matter the cost.